is Writing Wednesday, and I'm putting the phone in a different place today, just for the hell of it. Welcome to Writing Wednesday. I'm Janet Fitch, and what I thought I would do today is talk about meaning. You know, it's something that people sometimes are so busy in their writing life just trying to keep the story going, keep the plate spinning, move ahead, write good sentences, that there's an important element of fiction, especially literary fiction, that we sometimes lose sight of. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently, and I'm trying to, in some cases, think about why some books, while being very satisfying when you're reading them, don't stick with you. Why some books, that are keeping the action going and you're turning those pages and stuff, and yet you're wishing, you get to the point where there's another plot twist or another revelation, and it's just like you want to go, wait a second, what about what you've already created? How does that fit into this? And in the end, books where you walk away going like, what was I supposed to get out of that? There are books that are just a pleasant way of spending a day or two, just pleasant hour, and there's nothing against that, the pleasant hour, like a pleasant hour spent with strangers. It's very enjoyable. But when we talk about the difference between literary fiction and commercial fiction, this question of meaning, what does the reader get out of it besides just the pleasure of a pleasant hour? That I just don't think is talked about much, and it's something that it can be learned if the writer is interested in creating something beyond a pleasant moment's hour, a pleasant experience in the moment. If you want a book that will linger with the reader, a book that will maybe even change the way the reader sees the world. I know when I come to, and maybe I'm, a fussier reader than most people. I'm not as fussy a reader as many that people I can think of. But I think that even somebody who is creating a fiction that's a pleasant moment's hour, a fiction that is just going to be interesting for somebody to kill some time reading, but more so if you are striving to create something that will stay with the reader, something that they'll think about from time to time. What is that quality? And it's about meaning. It's about creating meaning in your work. Now, how does that work? I mean, some people just, that is not their ambition, is to, they want a thriller, but even a good thriller, hey, hi Miranda, sometimes just a good thriller will give you insights into the structure of reality, how we experience our lives. I can think of several thriller writers who do that, and it's our best people. I mean, somebody like Richard Price, I still remember, he has a book about development in the Lower East Side, and he characterized by just a really insightful description. He characterized what the process of gentrification, how it starts and how it feels. A very small detail. He talks about how the Lower East Side or Soho or any kind of gentrification zone starts with these artists, and they're just looking for space, and they're sleeping on mattresses, and they've rigged up showers out of sinks, and they don't really care how they live. They just clean it up. They're sort of squatting. They clean it up, and then they can work. They have space to work, and they get a mattress on the floor, and that's fine. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the book here, but he says that, then a little shop will open on the street in the block, a little hole in the wall that will sell coffee, like really nice coffee, to the artists. And he says, and the developers, they smell that they follow the smell of Italian coffee. And then it begins. And my God, whenever I think about, in some formerly, desolate area in LA, or little, working class enclave that just had always been very modest and stuff, and you see that little coffee house. And instead of thinking, oh, this is a good place to have some coffee, it's like I see it. I see it because Richard Ford saw it for me. And now I see the Italian coffee. And it's like I see the developers sniffing and see the whole process that's going to begin. And so even a commercial fiction can have insights that will stay with the reader. And I think that we sell our work short when we do not take the time to see how specifics in your story can open up and show you something more about life. And how do you do that? How do you create, I feel like unless somebody tells you that this can and should be done, I think of myself learning to write. It just never would have occurred to me. I might at random have created something like that, but it wouldn't have occurred to me to intentionally try to formulate some meaning that was an intrinsically useful and good thing to do in your fiction. When you think about why people read, why, people can read just to kill time, to have an interesting story and, run around with the characters for a while. But what many readers are craving is a wider understanding of life, especially readers of literary fiction. They're looking for a wider understanding of life. And it's not the same as reading self-help books, as reading nonfiction, which just comes out and says, that this is true and this is true and this is true. It's always part of the story. And the way that a fiction writer comes to it is that you say something, or your character sees something, or participates in something, and you stop and think about what you've just said. My teacher, Kate Braverman, used to say, stop and consider the implications. Consider what you've already said. Is there more there? Is there some truth? If you are writing about an ice skater, and you're writing about ice and ice skating and blah, 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 can you step back just for a second? You can have the character do it. That's the easier way, or the author can do it, but you have to be very careful that you're not solving a problem for the reader, that you're, you can't be as overt as you would in nonfiction. I usually do it because I write character-driven fiction, I try to have a protagonist, and this is part of my choice of a protagonist. I try to have a protagonist who is lively enough mentally that they can stop and consider the implications of things they're seeing, things they're doing, and step back a second. Maybe a young character, you can break in and have the older version of the character if they're too young to have these insights. You can have the older version of the character step back and go, you know, when I was watching that skater, and it never occurred to me, that this is what I would do for the rest of my life, is skate across, not knowing what's in the depths underneath the ice. So it's stopping and thinking about what things might mean, rather than just thinking about what comes next. Here, catch this, catch this, catch this. I mean, you can keep the reader occupied by throwing that ball at them that they have to keep catching. You can keep them through a whole book by doing that. Hi, Susie. You can keep a reader going by just the surprises, and have them running all over the place with your character. But if you can have them pause and consider the implications of what they're seeing, hearing, what does this have to do? What does this mean? What does it mean about life? What does it mean when, say, you see a change in someone, or if, say, I have a character who is kind of isolated and watches things, maybe a photographer or an artist, or and you would have them, consider what it means to be a watcher. What does it mean about life when you're watching something through a window that might have reverberations? They don't have to come out and tell us what, analyze it like a shrink would, but it behooves you to have a character who is active enough to say, you're sitting there bored in church, and then to think about God, and what does God think about this church? And, where is the devil's, in this scene? To move to the larger questions. It will tie your book together. Because larger themes will start adhering. What is the character's central problem is not whether Bobby is going to kiss her or not, but, her sense of abandonment, or her sense of, I'm working with issues of, my new maybe novel, I'm dealing with issues of memory, and forgetting and forgiveness, and holding anger about the past, and our relationship to the past versus the present, and how different people are, and to not just follow characters, but to drop down into the larger issues that you're raising. And it's hard it's not hard in the first draft. Often you just don't know what the hell it's about. You write the first draft and you're just throwing balls, for the reader to catch. But don't stop there. When you have finished it, then go, oh, what the hell was that about? It's not just about the surface story and how Patsy and, Tom get together, but what what insights have you shown the reader? What have you cracked open for us? What do we know about the world that we didn't know when we started it? What do we know about the human heart? What do we know about relationships? What do we know about our city? You know, characterizing a place. You know, don't just set something somewhere and just like it's like a two-dimensional thing. You know, a location has meaning as well, depending on what the character is going through. You know, I had in say in White Oleander, character looks at has had different looks at Oleander throughout the book. Right, there's a scene where she looks at Oleander and realizes that she's not sure whether oleander is intrinsically poisonous or does it concentrate the poison of the city inside of it, you know? So we're moving out of just description and this is a, you know, the big oleanders were blooming and the wind was going, but what does it mean to the character? And that's what we read for. I read for that, to find out what things mean to the character. You know, the landscape becomes alive, you know, and what the land remembers. There's echoes to characters' current problems and the place where it all started. And there's a conversation. So Kate used to say, if you have your characters making dinner, they don't have to think about making dinner. They can think about anything. And, you know, if you can have your character think about dinner or think about God, you know, have them be active, have them, you know, have them capable of having insight into the world. Or you can have you as the writer. It's not as easy, at least for me. You know, I'd rather do it through character. But, you know, to ask yourself what things mean. Another way of doing that is to create events and details that, like dreams, you know, the details of dreams become symbols for things in the character or in your life. They'll reoccur. You'll have symbols. And if you know you have a character who has an issue but isn't somebody who can have like little bits of insight, if you're not if your character is not going to be aware, then you, the writer, have to be aware of the meaning of things. You know, the car up on blocks means something. It's part of the character. They can't get started, right? They can't get started. And there's that car again. And they're getting rides from people who are sick of carting them around. And what does it mean about about life that you don't have your own propulsion? If you're not going to have the character aware, even in glimpses, they don't have to be aware all the time. That would be boring. It would take away a lot of the suspense. But they have insights. They can see something that we need to know. And then you move on. So you interact between characters' internal moments of insight. Sometimes the reader's moment of insight as you illustrate rather than have the character realize something that is meaningful. So, but this is what I think over the centuries, why people return to certain books, because there's insight in there. People used to not read self-help books. They read novels, and the novels that they return to are novels that reveal something about life. And to me, that's my uh, my goal in life was not to knock my phone over, but I thought a different angle would be fun today. So if you want to really touch the reader, if you want to move the reader, if you want to do something that's going to linger in their minds, don't run around so much. Don't have your characters running around so much. Let them stop occasionally and consider where they are. What do they know about life? And you can have characters with very different views. I mean, certainly, Marina had various views about life at different times and different circumstances. Her insights would be very different, but she always engaged with her environment and had a bigger idea about something. And characters don't need to be particularly well educated. That's a fallacy to have insight, because it also is saying that uneducated people don't have insight, which is wrong. They might not be able to express it in their own language, so third person is often useful. But I like a character who is mentally active and engaged with the world, so that we can do it through point of view, through character. But many novelists, are able just to say, the thriller writers, Vienna was a town of this and that, and when you go there, you see it through their eyes. It stays with you. So about this meaning question, I just am putting out a pitch for it. That even if you're writing commercial fiction, try to get in there with your characters and see if there's some insight into the human condition that you can get to with them. Especially characters that when they're, you have people running around too much, or they're all, I like a thriller, I like a book where somebody's after a certain thing, but you can have insights along the way. You can tell us about your town. You can tell us about, some kid and what you see in them. It doesn't have to be the characters always thinking of their next move. It's just not as interesting, and it does not stay with the reader the way giving them these. It's moments of sheer gold where you can tell us something about human life. So, I've got a. Oh, thank you, Ruthie. I have a question from Ruthie, who is with us right now, who has just had a new book coming out called The Curse of the Ninth. The Curse of the Ninth? Let me pull it up. That she said, my writing problems, because I've been asking you for any questions you have and your writing problems, and she said, so my writing problems, first you spend years researching, writing, workshopping, querying, rejection, etc. Then you're lucky enough to get published, and your book is just out, right? Now the marketing and publicity, more doors close than open. There's the doors in your mind, and then there's the doors in the world. And what happens is when a book comes out, you have fantasies about how it's going to go. And then when it's actually going, it's like, oh, this is reality. And reality is always inferior to what you imagine. It's always inferior. On the other hand, it's actually happening, whereas what's in your imagination is not actually happening. So when a book comes out, there's the high of, there it is. And then there's the bummer when you realize that it's going to have the life it's going to have the doors it's going to have, and how do you reconcile one to the other? I think that you should, for myself, it's like the pleasure, I try to focus on the pleasure that it's out. It made it through all those jumps. And I focus on the people who like it, people who've read it, who like it, bookstores who are willing to have you, friends who are willing to come and hear you read, and maybe sometimes strangers. And, you generate what publicity you can for it. But there's that question, is it worth it? So we're back to meaning, okay? If your intention was to make a lot of money, you know my feeling about that. If your intention is to make a lot of money, go to law school, go to business school, go on Wall Street, go into real estate, go somewhere where the money is. Writing is not where the money is, unless you get super lucky. But writing is a pleasure in itself, as well as, it can be a pleasure, it can be a nightmare, and that can happen on a single day. But when you have put some insights into the world that you would not have had unless you were working on something, you have unlocked something in yourself, an opinion, a point of view, a perspective. You have forced yourself to think again about the world. And that's always going to be out there, and it's always going to be part of you, that you made a bigger statement about the world. You figured out something that you actually think about life. And so that's always, whether or not the book goes on the New York Times bestseller list or not, you'll have that. You've made a statement about the world. You've had an opinion. You've formulated an opinion based on the story you're working on. I'm always surprised what I come up with when I'm writing. I never come up with these insights when I'm just living my life. I look at stuff and I just, it wouldn't occur to me to think more deeply about it. But if I'm writing, I look at the world and I stop and ask, what does it mean? I give this example is that I was writing, doing the weather, as we've talked about. And I saw this jacaranda tree across the little valley where I live, on another hillside, and it was in bloom in November. It was blooming out of season. And I could, if I wasn't writer, I would just have looked, or if I would have just looked at that and go, oh, that's a pretty tree. But because I'm a writer, I saw it. I saw, oh my God, there's a jacaranda. It's blooming out of season. And then I asked myself, what does it mean? Now, it would mean something different. Hi, Janet. It would mean something different depending on what I was writing about. But at the time I was writing poetry, so I was writing about myself. And I thought about a tree blooming out of season. What does that mean to me as a person of a certain age? It had overtones for me, that one can bloom out of season. This is the wrong time to bloom, November, middle age, whatever. It's the wrong time, and yet there it is, and you're doing it. You're blooming, or the tree's blooming, or somebody's blooming. The opening, you can make the world speak. So it's not just a character insight. It can be the world, that you can think of it as the world speaking. And so as a writer, you're thinking all the time, what is it saying? What is it saying? You know, I remember the opening of one of the Faulkner novels where Miss Coldwell is sitting in a dusty room, and she's in a chair that's too big for her, that was clearly her father's, and it's too big for her. And it was a very hot day, and the wisteria growing outside the house was blooming for the second time that year. And so everything else seems very discouraging about Miss Coldwell. But the fact that the wisteria was blooming for the second time alerts me to the fact that it might not be over for Miss Caldwell. There might be a second act here. So using the environment to express something, not just factually, but symbolically, is a way to pull meaning up into the book. And it's a way of living in the world, you know? So to not be discouraged where any one product of that process, how that product is met. You can't control that. If that book is a product of your process, your ongoing conversation with the world, that is you as an artist. These books that you create are just byproducts of the internal process. So the fact, that the doors seem to be closing as you would hope that they would be opening, never forget that you created something in the world that wasn't there before, and it'll never be taken away. You have written a book that came out, and it will be there forever. Very important. It's very important. Very good. Yeah, I'm proud of you. But we all have those moments of why are we doing this? And it's so we can better handle the fabric of reality. There's a wonderful poem by Joseph Brodsky. Let's see if I have it easy to reach. Probably not. Oh, maybe. Let's see what's in this one. That he talks about that. What I like is that it's there it is. It's called Nature Mort, which is one of my favorite Brodskys. And let's see what page. And it looks at a wardrobe, part of it. He's in exile, and his family's back in Russia. I mean, this is a difficult period of his time. But he talks about the ancient cabinet outside as well as in. Strangely reminds me of Paris's Notre Dame. Everything's dark within it. Dust mop or bishop's stole can't touch the dust of things. Things themselves, as a rule, don't try to purge or tame the dust of their own insides. Dust is the flesh of time, time's very flesh and blood. This is just a little bit from that longer poem. Dust is the flesh of time. That's moving to the big issues, right? He's not just looking at an old wardrobe in his hotel room in Paris and thinking, it's sort of old and dusty, and this is depressing, and I'm an exile, and I'm depressed. He tries to tell you something about existence. Dust is the flesh of time. God, I mean, great poetry does it. That's all poets have. They have the sound of language and insight into the world. As fiction writers, we have story as well. We have story, character, and all that. But never forget that we have that ability to create meaning, and to characterize the world, and think about it and add something to the description, to add something to our sense of what the world is made of. Yeah. So it's in Part of Speech by Joseph Brodsky. He is one of my favorite poets, and he won the Nobel. And that's a poem called Nature Mort that he goes right to it. Many of the great poets, they go right to it. And some description, it's not quite as, things don't they're not quite symbols. They are what they are. It's a dusty wardrobe. It's not a symbol of something, but it brings about this further thought about what is dust. I know how he figured it out. He sat there and going, this thing is full of dry rot, probably. And what is dust? Dust. And he came up with something, and maybe it was a while till he was actually able to pull the whole thought out, and come up with dust is the flesh of time. There's a challenge. So what else can I talk about meaning? Be a hunter for meaning. When you walk around, look at things and see if you can go the next step and tell us what it means. An urban farm. There's an urban farm on one of my walks here in the heart of LA. There's this little farm, and people hate, the neighbors, immediate neighbors hate it, because you hear the sheep and the chickens and stuff. I think it's just sheep. But what does it mean to have a secret farm in the middle of the city? What if you have a character who sees that? What might that mean? It's like a secret remnant of something. And then that would be about what's a secret remnant within them. And what does it mean that cities have these secrets? What is a farm? What is these very eccentric people who have this farm, and don't care what the neighbors think, and they got their old junk, sort of humorous junk, out in front, and the neighbors hate that because it's a gentrifying neighborhood. So it's it's a kind of life that is cobbled together rather than sold to you. There's a lot of different things you could conclude about this farm. So when you go about your day, or when you're writing, see if there's a little insight, a little bit, see if you can move to the next step, pull some insight or observation about the world out of the specifics that you're handling. Let's see. And just keep asking yourself, what does it mean? Especially when you get to the end of a draft and you have a bunch of stuff going on, and to go, gee, what does this all mean? It will help you shape. It's like raising the Titanic. You make a huge mess, basically, with a first draft. Most people are not planners and plotters, and it's very difficult to make up meaning. You extract meaning. You pull it up into consciousness. So say I've made this huge mess of a novel, first draft. And then you start looking and you say, what does it really mean? What is the resonant part of this? What part of this actually goes deeper into the human experience? What part of this has a theme, has some meaning attached to it? And then you can start seeing what you don't need, what's just a bunch of running around, and what is actually putting you in touch with the central themes. And that resonates more, that has more going on below the surface. And then it helps you shape the second draft. And then it helps you shape the third draft, and it helps you get a good ending, because if you don't know what it means, it's hard to get a resonant ending. Okay. And that will help you get write a memorable book rather than just a pleasant afternoon's exercise. So I want to thank you. If you have any more questions, I'm open to them. Otherwise, we will say goodbye and go out in search of meaning and see if you can capture those in your notebooks. Okay, well, thank you for joining me, and next week we'll see what else. All right, thank you. Bye.